It's Wednesday, April the 29th, and welcome to Morning Message. We have a bin in our basement that collects used cans, like pop cans and things like that. And when it's almost full, there's 100 cans in there, and I bag those and take them down to the recycle place and get $5 for 100 cans. When the kids were younger, if they counted out the cans, they would get the $5. So one Saturday morning I was about to go do my errands for the morning, and I saw there was a bag of cans already counted, so I tied up the top and took them down to the recycle place. Later on that day, I won't mention Riley's name, but I handed her the $5, and she said, "What's that for?" I said, "For the cans that you counted." And she looked at me kind of sheepishly, and she said, "There were only 92 cans." That's why she hadn't tied up the top. So I felt guilty about that. The next time that we went to the recycle place with a bag full of cans, I made sure there was 108 cans, but I only told them that there were 100. And ever since then, I usually give one or two extra into that bag, just to try and continue to make up for the mistake that was made earlier and any other mistakes I had made in my counting of the cans. Kind of like a baker's dozen, isn't it? If you go to the butcher and ask for a dozen steaks, you're going to get 12. If you go to the candlestick maker and ask for a dozen candles, you're going to get 12. But if you go to the baker and ask for a dozen buns, you just might get 13. And believe it or not, in some places, it's actually 14 that you get. Scholars don't actually agree on why a baker's dozen is 13. But the most commonly agreed story goes back to the Middle Ages in England, when weights and measures were a big concern. And people knew that a certain amount of flour should produce a certain number of buns. And lots of different things can affect the weight of flour and the weight of the product, including humidity. And there was severe punishment if a baker produced a product that fell short of the weight that it was supposed to have. So bakers got in the habit of adding one or two more items to make sure that they were over the minimum weight, because there were severe punishments for those bakers who came up short. And that's the generally agreed upon theory about why a baker's dozen is 13. That's one of the odd phenomenons in our lives, is kind of buyer's remorse, or feeling as though you're getting gypped somehow. It could even be that the seller of a product is giving you exactly what you want, and it's able to do exactly what it's supposed to do. And there's something about that for the purchaser doesn't quite fully satisfy. This coming Sunday, the gospel has to do with the Good Shepherd. It's one of the images that Jesus uses frequently in his teaching. And near the end of the gospel reading for Sunday, there is a promise about abundant life, that we are to have life and to have it abundantly. There is a school of thought that thinks that if we're good and pray and all that sort of thing, God will bless us materially. The people that think that are absolutely wrong. There's not much that I'm absolute about, but I'm certain that that wasn't the idea that Jesus was trying to communicate. The people who teach that are wrong in their teaching. And there's a phenomenon that we experience in life that when we buy something, it doesn't quite measure up. It doesn't quite fulfill us in the way that we would hope. And we can buy more and more and more stuff, and still there's an emptiness. It doesn't really match with what we want. The thing that we're buying might do exactly what it was supposed to do, but there's a part of us that doesn't feel fulfilled. The Rolling Stones sang about the guy on the TV telling me how white my shirt should be. Our shirts never seem to get white enough. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Those material things don't really fulfill that longing that's deep inside of all of us. And that's not the promise that Jesus is making anyway. The promise has to do with abundant life that's very different from accumulating stuff in our lives. It really has to do with the promise that God makes for being in relationship with us, and a perfect kind of relationship, a relationship that is at the same time vulnerable and safe. God has committed that act of vulnerability, being incarnate, trusting the child Christ to human parents, allowing that child to be crucified, to die in a most horrible way. That intimacy, that vulnerability is something that God gives us, and it is done in a way that is safe for us. That's the promise that God makes, that our relationship with God is vulnerable and safe. That's our best hope for our community as well. That's the thing that we strive for, to create communities that are intimate, vulnerable, and yet always safe. Fairly enough, the criticism is that we don't always measure up to that, but that is what we always strive for, a community that's vulnerable and safe. Amen.